Welcome to my first drive video on this Skoda Octavia vRS hatch. This is the first Skoda press car I've had on the channel. When I was at school many moons ago, Skoda were unfortunately the butt of many jokes. My personal favourite was, why do Skodas have heated rear windows? To keep your hands warm while you're pushing them. But since the early 90s, Skoda have come a long way. In fact, they've been part of the Volkswagen group for the past 30 years. And in many ways, as we're about to find out, I think they make the better overall package. As with most press cars, I was given this for a week, except I'm only in the UK for 4 days before I disappear back to the US tomorrow. And the past 3 days have been dreadful weather. I mean, weather that I couldn't possibly film in. So when I woke up this morning and I saw the sun was going to be out, I rushed down to my favourite spot. So you have to excuse that the car is a little bit grubby, and even if I did clean it this morning, it would have got covered in grime on the way down here. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for the Octavia vRS, especially the Mark III, which is a predecessor to this very latest Mark IV. Styling wise, I'm not 100% convinced about this car, and I don't think the Phoenix orange paintwork helps. I've seen them in blue and silver, and I think it suits the car a lot more. I also think that it's crying out for spacers or maybe even completely different wheels, because I'm not the biggest fan of these wheels. And because of restrictions in this day and age, the wheels have to sit so far inside the wheel arches, maybe making it look a little bit too understated. But the minute you get behind the wheel, you do realise it's the real deal. Before we talk about what's underneath the skin and take it out for a drive, the first thing that stands out for me is its price. An Octavia vRS in manual, like this one, with the 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, will set you back 34 grand. If you wanted the DSG box, you'd pay an extra £1,700. And if you wanted the estate version, you'd pay another £1,200 on top of that. So even if you went for a DSG version of this with the estate, you're still looking at something that's going to cost you a lot less than 40 grand. And I think for a car that's sold in this day and age, well, that stands for really good value. There's also a diesel option available, both in hatch and estate, and they're both DSG only. And Skoda make a 4x4 diesel with DSG box, a bit like an Audi all-road if you like, and Audi don't make the all-road anymore. So if you're looking for something to replace your all-road that's in the same group, maybe you should check out one of those. Underneath this car's bonnet and underneath this car's skin, it's very similar to Volkswagen's Golf GTI, and that's not a bad thing. So we have an EA 888 engine, which is a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged unit, produces 245 horsepower and 370 newton meters of torque. In this particular press car, we have the 6-speed manual gearbox, and all that power and torque is fed through the front axle alone, giving this car a claimed 0-62 time of 6.8 seconds, or if you go for the DSG, well, it's only a tenth quicker at 6.7 seconds. And it has an overall combined WLTP fuel consumption figure of just over 40 miles to the gallon, which is really impressive. And again, that doesn't really change whether you go for the 6-speed manual or the 7-speed DSG. Jumping inside, and I'm really impressed. There's no doubting that this is from the Volkswagen group, but there's also no doubting that it is something different, and Skoda have added their own flair to the dashboard and the interior in general. These seats are really comfortable and lovely. They remind me very much of some of the seats that you find in the Cupra range, which is not a bad thing. They fit me and my frame exceptionally well. The driving position is pretty good. It's never amazing in Volkswagen group cars for taller drivers like me, but it's not too bad at all. The steering wheel is a particular highlight for me. They've played around with the buttons, and unlike the Mark 8 Golf GTI or Golf R, where it has those haptic buttons that sit way too close to the actual rim of the wheel, These are inbound, so you're not going to foul them with your hands even when you're pushing on. It's just a really lovely wheel to feel and operate, if you like. We've got Skoda's very own virtual cockpit in front of me, and that has various different layouts, etc., that you can cycle through, and I think it all looks very, very good. Some are completely useless, like they are in cars like Seat and Volkswagen and Audi, but some are really useful. I like that particular one, has a rev counter at the top and a big clear speedo in the middle, or even the traditional dials are very nice and easy to use. And once again, you can have a big digital speedo in the center of the dash. Then we've got engine temp on the left hand side and the fuel gauge on the right hand side. The infotainment system, well, it's a modern day Volkswagen Group car, so it's not brilliant, but once again, as far as I can tell, it's better than the one that is in Volkswagen Golf 8 or, let's say, Cupra Born or something. It's very similar, but it seems to work better, seems to be a bit more intuitive, and Skoda have left us with some buttons down here. They're almost like quick access buttons, so car modes, if we want to get into climate control quickly, and I think they make all the difference. There's even a carbon trim here, which does look pretty good, especially when it contrasts with this lovely Alcantara with red stitching. And yes, when you go a bit lower, there are some cheaper plastics, lower door cards here, center console, etc. But you've got to remember, you're getting a lot of car for 35 odd grand, so I really find it hard to complain about that. You've even got things like a sunglasses holder up here, which is something I haven't seen in a car for many, many years. The cup holders down here, they're not brilliant. If you have something rather large, well, firstly they won't fit in there because they are quite tight. But if you have something that's quite long, especially if you've got a manual car like this one, well, you can't put it in them because obviously each time you change gear you're going to be fouling it with your arm and it will make things very difficult. So I think the cup holders are probably the weakest point, but that's something again that has always been a weak point for many Volkswagen Group cars over the past 20 or 25 years. When you jump in the back, there's loads of room back there, plenty of headroom. If you had 4 of Joes in here, I'm 6'4", you would not have an issue. If you had 5 of us, well, like so many cars, obviously the center of the bench at the back there is compromised, but you can get a 5th adult in there if you need to. When it gets really interesting is in the boot. With the seats folded up like they are now, you get 600 litres of space back there. With the seats folded flat, you get a massive 1,555 litres. That's more boot space than I've got in my Touring. So bigger boot in a hatch compared to an estate car, that should give you some idea of just how big the boot is, especially when those rear seats are folded. So this is very practical, even if you don't decide to go for the estate version of this car. I think if you do, the boot on that is close to 1,800 litres, which is just absolutely massive. So very practical, affordable, put together well, has very good ingredients. I mean, this car is shaping up already, before we take it out on the road, to be something quite special. Yes, it has very maybe overly understated looks, but I'm sure that's going to suit a lot of people. One option that this particular press car doesn't have is the head-up display. That's probably something that I would tick if I was getting one of these. I live with a head-up display on a day-to-day basis in my M3, and I have to say it's such a clever and safe piece of technology. And if you can tick one for your car, whether it's one of these or anything else out there, I really think it's an option that should be standard on so many cars today, because it really means that your eyes are looking more at the road than down at the dashboard, and therefore your peripheral vision is much better and you're much more likely to spot something like a pedestrian stepping out into the road. First things first, let's test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. It's not built for straight line pace. It has less than 250 horsepower and it's a fairly large saloon slash hatchback. It's also front wheel drive, which is the worst setup in terms of trying to lay your power and torque down on the ground and get a good acceleration figure. But 6.8 seconds isn't bad at all, especially for a manual. I say especially for a manual, well, this actually has quite long ratios. Second gear is good for 73 miles an hour, apparently. So we're only going to need to change gear once. Hopefully I shouldn't fluff it too much. My Racebox Mini is ready to go. I'm in first gear. I've put it into sport and I've turned all the traction control off, although I don't think it's entirely off. There's a soft limiter at just below 4,000 RPM. I guess all I need to do now is dump the clutch, but maybe not too fast because I don't want it to bog down. Here we go. Bit of wheel spin into second. Here we go. Oh, and there's 60. 6.68 seconds. So add a tenth to 62. 6.8 seconds. Essentially exactly what they predicted. It's 12 degrees outside, so chilly-ish. There's definitely no heat in these tyres whatsoever, and the tarmac is mostly dry, but there are some damp patches, so that's not too bad. Let's get it out on the road and see what this car is like to live with. One option this particular press car does have is dynamic chassis control. I think it's about £1,000, and it's definitely something that you should tick for your Octavia vRS or anything in the Volkswagen Group lineup that has the option of dynamic chassis control, because here in the UK our roads are average at best. I know I bang on about them a lot, but they are pretty horrific, and the better the damping you can get on your car, the better the ride quality is going to be, and the better it's going to perform, the more grip it's going to find, if you like. When you're through a corner like this, if it's a little bit bumpy, the car's set up too stiff, then it will skip through the corner. If the car tracks through the corner nicely, then you're going to find loads and loads of grip, and having an adjustable dynamic chassis control setup like this car is brilliant. When you're in default or comfort, it's knocked right back. When you're in sport, it's going to be stiffened right up, and when you're in individual, you can obviously adjust that or configure that to how you want. So I've got it set at a midway point. It supports the weight of this car really well, feels nice and sporty when you want it to, but it also is knocked back enough that it gives you a good ride quality, and I really love that particular feature. There's a number of other settings. It's almost like your M button or an RS button. You just have to go into your mode here and select individual, and that brings up all of your favorite presets. I'm going to interrupt this video with some really exciting news. Me and my good friend and fellow YouTuber Petrolped are starting a podcast called
The Drive Talk Podcast, but even cooler than that, it's the Drive Talk Podcast powered by Michelin.
So make sure you stay tuned, keep an eye out for it. There'll be links in the description below to our YouTube channel, to various social media, etc. We've got loads of guests and live shows planned. We're looking forward to sharing it all with you lot. I would assume the majority of people are going to go with the 7-speed DSG gearbox option, and we know that that on the whole is a very good box. But what's this 6-speed manual gearbox like? Well, I have to say, I'm really impressed with it. You know when you're in gear, it's quite a long throw, but it's also quite a mechanical feeling box. The negatives of it are how long the actual gearing is. We've already talked about second gear taking you up to 73 miles an hour, and I worked out in my head that third gear would be good for just over 100 miles an hour. So if you're pushing on along your favorite road, really first, second and third gear is all you're going to be in, a bit like a Cayman GT4 or something. But unlike the Cayman, well, this car has a lovely mid-range punch from the 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. It's really lovely between about 2,500 RPM and let's say 4,500, and then beyond that, well, it likes to rev as well. So you can leave it in fourth like we are here, and it's got plenty of poke. It picks up really nicely. But if you change it down into third or even into second out of here, and you put your foot down, well, it revs out really nicely. It's just a real peach of a gearbox paired up to a really nice engine. I think it's the nicest calibration between the EA 888 and a gearbox that I've ever experienced. It just feels like they were made and designed together. They work very, very well together. And something else that works very well is when you're on the motorway at 70 miles an hour, well, that nice long gearing actually plays into your favor then, because at 70 in sixth, you're only ticking away at about 2,200 RPM. And that means you get really good economy figures back. In fact, I was seeing about 45 this morning, and I'm sure in better conditions this would almost touch 50, which is incredible for a petrol engine. And thankfully, because it has that mid-range, if you start going up an incline and you're fully loaded with 4 adults and luggage in the boot, well, this car has enough torque at 2,200 RPM to pull you up that hill, so you don't have to change down into fifth or anything. So I think that calibration and this gearbox and engine setup are absolutely spot on. What's the steering feel like in this car? Well, like so many e-Pass systems, it is adjustable between normal and sport. My default is normal because sport is just overly heavy. It just takes away any of that feel that is left in the system. But you do get a really nice feel. You can tell exactly what's going on beneath you on that front axle. This car doesn't suffer too badly from torque steer, but when torque steer is approaching, you can feel it in the rim of this wheel. And I'm sure the thin rim of the actual steering wheel does help induce as much feel to me as possible. And also the fact this car doesn't have massively wide tyres. In fact, it has 225 section tyres all round. I haven't driven a car that has 225s all round for a long time, and I must admit, when I first saw that it had those, I was a little bit worried that it would struggle to put traction down and it would just have a little bit too little lateral grip through the corners. But actually, Skoda have engineered this car perfectly. It feels like it moves around in a nice way when you approach the limit, but it lays down enough power when you need it, and it certainly slows down well enough when you hit the brakes. So a combination of all those things really do mean that you do get a nice amount of steering feel, which is refreshing, especially when you've got a manual box car. It really does feel old school in that sense, but yeah, it's all screwed together and put together in one package to produce something really, really special. Let's just push it a little bit and see what it's like close to the limit. Unfortunately, I have my walking boots on, which aren't ideal for heel and toe, but the pedal placement is fantastic, so I can still do it. Coming into here, well, it's brilliant on the brakes. Down into second, loads of feel through the steering. I can feel that front axle moving around. Let's see what it's like on the exit. Foot on the floor, little bit of wheel spin. Diff does a great job, pulls me out. It's just a really accomplished bit of kit. It feels really good at fairly normal speeds. We weren't breaking any speed limits there, but we're still having fun in this car because it feels quite light on its feet. Everything's talking to me. I've got the manual box, the steering feel, everything just comes together and works really, really well. So as you can probably tell, I'm massively impressed with this car, with this package. Before I give you my conclusion, let's just talk about a couple of the negatives that I've found with this car in the short time that I've had it. The first one is the infotainment system. We talked about that earlier on. It's not tragic, but it could be better. The next one is the ergonomics of the driving position. Now, although the actual driving position itself isn't bad in terms of where the wheel and the pedals are for me, and I'm sure most shapes and sizes, it's just when I sit here on a cruise or a long journey, I've got nowhere to put my elbows. The armrest is miles away, as are the door cards, and it just seems to all be set up badly. And that's not a Skoda issue, that seems to be a Volkswagen group issue. Even Audis have a similar sort of issue. I can't understand why they can't get it right like BMW or Porsche. When you're in a Porsche, you've got your hands on the wheel, your elbows are never far away from the nearest armrest, so when you do get into a cruise, it's just nice and relaxing and easy. And I know to some people that might sound ridiculous, but to me, who does long journeys and long road trips, I know that that would become a little bit tiring after a while. Otherwise, aside from its looks, which I'm not blown away by, I have to say I'm massively impressed with this car. What's my conclusion of this Octavia vRS hatch? Well, it's probably no surprise that I'm going to tell you I absolutely love it. This much car and this much package for less than £35,000 in 2023 is unreal. Would I have one? Absolutely. It wouldn't be a hatch, it would be an estate, it would be in blue, manual gearbox, I'd have dynamic chassis control and a head-up display. That would still come in at under £40,000, which is really important here in the UK because of the tax break. I think it's a brilliant car, and I've really enjoyed my short time with it. Hopefully I'll get one for a bit of a longer period when I'm back in the UK, because I'd really like to get under its skin a little bit more. But until then, take it easy, and I'll see you at another video very soon. Cheers.